Hello, everybody. My name is Sami. I'm one of the founders of CertiCraft. We are on a mission to help craft cannabis producers transition into and thrive within the regulated market here in Canada. And this is the State of Craft, episode 6. The State of Craft is a series where we bring different guests from around the craft cannabis industry, people who have who engage with the craft cannabis industry in different kinds of ways to facilitate discussions on the industry that we're in, what's going well, what's not going well, how we can make things better. Today, we are super excited to have a very special guest here. We have Brittny Anderson, MLA from the Nelson-Creston riding in BC. She's also been city councillor in Nelson and is a co-founder of the Cannabis Conservatory project. I will introduce her in a moment. Before we get into that, I just wanted to take care of a few housekeeping items. For those of you that are here already, we have a chat. Please feel free to say hi and engage with us there. If you have any questions for Brittny as they come throughout, as we go throughout this discussion that we'll be having here, we have a dedicated questions tab. So ask your questions in there. If you see a question you like, upvote it. We have 15 minutes at the end dedicated for questions and answer, and we'll just go through the questions list in order of what has the most upvotes. And I think that's it as far. And thank you to the Nelson Innovation Center for sponsoring this series by letting us use their boardroom here. So without further ado, I'd like to bring Brittny Anderson up onto the stage here. And Brittny, before we get into our discussion, I'm just going to make you take the full stage here and ask you to introduce yourself and maybe give us a little bit of background about who you are and your relationship with the cannabis industry. And yeah, after that, we'll get into a discussion.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Sami, and to the CertiCraft team for inviting me to join you on this podcast today. It's certainly a pleasure, and this is the first podcast I've done as an MLA, so it's very exciting for me. So I just want to thank you all for the opportunity. So I am currently as Sami said, I'm the MLA for Nelson-Creston. I'm also the Premier Special Advisor on Youth. And just a little bit of background on me. So I grew up in Nelson and, did all my schooling here. And then so I was never involved in the sort of unregulated or medical or gray market of cannabis. But so after my master's, when we found out that Colorado was going to be legalizing cannabis, we knew, and when I say we, I mean myself and Jacob, who is my co-founder with the Cannabis Conservatory, and we have other co-founders now, but we were there at the start. He was formerly my roommate for our university program at the Central European University in Budapest, and he's from the States. And we had met up in Portland, and we're just talking about what cannabis legalization was going to look like. And then from our backgrounds, I have a master's of environmental science and policy. We were really concerned with what the legal cannabis markets might look like. We're in a climate crisis, and certainly the cannabis industry can use a lot of resources. And so we wanted to create a model where, like they do in lots of other systems, like we see it in organic, we wanted to create a sustainability certification for cannabis. So we developed the Cannabis Conservatory, and we created the sustainability certification for the cannabis industry, and we worked on that. We started that about 7 years ago. We've been primarily working in the US, and just for total transparency, for conflict of interest reasons, I have talked to the provincial conflict of interest person, and they know about the work that I have done. I'm still a partial owner of the company. If you can hear a weird sound right now, that is my dog deciding to drink water. She just got up from her nap. My apologies.
You sound loud and clear.
Okay, great. And so, sorry, where was I, Sami? I got distracted from my job.
You were just saying how you got permission from the conflict of interest person.
Yeah, so just so it's clear, the work that the Cannabis Conservancy is doing, it is all focused in the US right now. So none of that work's happening in Canada. So the work that I am doing in government, there's no worry that there's a conflict of interest. So I just think that that's important in case people are a little bit curious about that. I think it's really the transparency around everything that we do, I think is incredibly important. But with my work there, I ended up meeting a woman, Kelly Coulter with Normal Women Canada. They'd done a lot of advocacy around cannabis, and she had invited myself and Mark Spear to actually go down to Ottawa, and this was when Canada was working on legalization. And one of the things that was the most concerning for us is that it appeared that some of the larger people with licenses were advocating not to allow cannabis to be cultivated outdoors. And from our perspective, it is a plant. There's no reason why it should be not be allowed to be cultivated outdoors. And so we actually flew to Ottawa to make that case in front of many different MPs. And what was really great about that whole experience, and that was my first experience sort of engaging with the federal government on that level, was that when it went back to the Senate, when the question about allowing outdoor came up, the words that we had written down, it was verbatim, the words that we had written was presented to the Senate. And of course, now cannabis is allowed to be cultivated outdoors. And my dog wants to go outside, Sammy, so excuse me while I let her out.
That is okay. You need to deal with your household needs, and that's totally fine. That's so interesting. I had no idea that the government was initially wanting to go down this path of super technical indoor hydroponic whatever as a requirement, that you can't just grow a thing that for thousands and thousands of years is grown naturally outdoors, that you can't do that anymore in a way that's legal. That is so bizarre that was ever on the table.
That's how we felt, and it was such a huge red flag, and so we really wanted to take the opportunity to just advocate for outdoor. It makes absolutely no sense. If people want to cultivate indoors, that's totally fine, but it should not prevent other people from being able to cultivate cannabis or any other plant outdoors.
Mm-hmm. So how did that? Does this tie in eventually into being a city councillor and then becoming an MLA, or is that a totally different thread of your career path?
So I think it does tie in, because through the work that I was doing with cannabis, and I had worked in local government before working in the Cannabis Conservancy. So, I had worked in government. I knew what that looked like. But when I was really looking at, the leadership and the questions that were being asked, it made me really concerned that younger people's voices and perspectives and rural voices and perspectives, I didn't feel like were being adequately represented. And so I started to think about it a little bit, and then we were actually so with the Craft Cannabis Association of BC, they were doing an event at UBCM, which is the Union of BC Municipalities, and they had invited me to join them. That was up in Whistler that year, and so I ended up in the car with Teresa Taylor, whose dad is the mayor of Grand Forks. And I just sort of let it slip that running for council, because it was something that was coming up, was something that I had considered. And so when we got to UBCM, we're talking. There's a bunch of people from the Kootenays, other people from the cannabis industry, and Teresa tells everyone that I'm running for council, which I haven't talked to my partner about it yet. This was just like an idea I was sort of saying. And everyone was really encouraging, and so I felt really sort of excited about the thought. And then of course I came home. My partner was incredibly supportive. I know anytime I give him a crazy idea, he always kind of looks at me and goes, I don't know why you wouldn't do it. And so I was really grateful for that. And I ran, and, I didn't know what that was going to look like. There was 19 people that were running. And so I felt like, I could just do my best and see if I could get a spot on council. And I was lucky enough, I got the second most votes. And so I felt very secure in my council seat. And I really enjoyed the work that I was able to do on council. And I felt like I, really listened to what the community was telling us and tried to work with other councillors to get a lot of other initiatives going, like active transportation. We dusted that manual off. It hadn't been looked at or the plan, it hadn't been looked at in 10 years. And so we had a working group that I got to lead. And now we're seeing, the first sort of active transportation corridor being built along High Street and then along 3rd. That's really going to help protect cyclists, but also make it more accessible for people with strollers, for walkers, and also for people in wheelchairs with all of the bump downs, and then the traffic calming measures as well. So just working on a lot of those.
So question for you that I want to jump in here with. In your time in City Council in Nelson, was there anything that you did there that affected the craft cannabis industry in any kind of way? Did that ever end up on the table in front of you when you were in session?
So yes and no, because so we did. So one of the first things that we did was they had done a lottery system for. So I think that there was before legalization, I think there was a lot of fear around what this was going to look like, what cannabis available in our communities was going to look like, and so and actually legalization occurred during that election. So legalization occurred and then we were sort of elected a few days after that. So one of the first things that came to the table was this dispensary lottery. And, and they had done a lot of work, around stakeholder engagement. And they had determined that in the city of Nelson, there should be specific zones where there can be specific retail outlets and a number of outlets, or retail spaces. And there's one organization, they had been like a dispensary or retail outlet that they had been working, in the gray market, and then were ready to transition. And they've been doing a lot of work within the community, really. And they didn't get the lottery. And so the question was then, we're going to deny deny them for moving forward. And I stood up and said, no, we shouldn't be doing this. And then everyone else was like, oh yeah, no, we should let buddies continue. So they were able to continue, which I think was really important for our community. They had worked really hard on gaining a good reputation. And, I think that from everything that I've seen, and even talking to the chief of police, after legalization, asking him, has anything changed? Has anything become worse because of legalization? He said, it's the same. The dispensaries, it's been a non-issue. Everyone has been really good players. They're very transparent. They're very open and welcoming. And so I think by allowing that dispensary, I think was really the right choice for the community. There was the Nelson Cannabis Collective had requested rezoning, but because they were doing cultivation and I was working in the Cannabis Conservatory at that time, and we hadn't decided at that time not to work in Canada because of my work, I actually recused myself from the discussion, but the rest of council did determine that the Nelson Cannabis Collective would be able to get the rezoning that they had applied for. And so to my understanding, they're in the process of, they're going to be building here soon as well.
And they're actually building their facility like about 200 meters that way from where I am.
Yes, just for anyone that hasn't been to the Nelson Innovation Center, it's gorgeous, and we love the work that they're doing.
Here, I'll show you guys what it looks like in here. It's a little spot that's meant for entrepreneurs and freelancers and people that work from home to have a space to come to and work out of. Though it has not been the vision that they wanted with COVID being here. They had to shut it down like 2 months after it started. But we've had a sponsorship to be here for the past year. CertiCraft, we have like a little tiny office in the space here, which has been so awesome to get to have free rent in a beautiful space like this. Cool. Well, I guess I won't ask you anything specific about the MLA side of things just yet, and that'll emerge in the conversation that we're going to have. But I'm going to ask you the first question that we typically ask our guests on here, which is in this case the fourth or fifth question, which is what do you see as having gone well in the legal craft cannabis world so far since the rollout of legalization 3 years ago?
Yeah, so I think in terms of some of the things that have gone well, I think the work that has been done by Community Futures. So they've done their cannabis business transition. and they've been able to support people that are looking at transitioning from the non-regulated market into the regulated market. And I know, Sami, you've been working with them quite closely. And that project, I'm so glad that we've been able to see that here in the Kootenays. And I know that there's definitely been other people from other places around BC that have hoped that they would receive some type of similar support, because we know that in this region there's a lot of cannabis producers that just in order to transition, it's a lot of money, it's a lot of hurdles, there's a lot of unknowns. What we were also seeing in our region was consultants that were coming in, making these big promises, not giving people necessarily very good contracts, and I think really taking advantage of our culture and the work that we had been doing. There was a lot of promises made, and I think that was harmful to our local cannabis industry. But I think what Community Futures was able to do was really to fill that void and be that place where they're building that relationship with Health Canada. They're getting those answers, and then they're being able to support those growers as they've transitioned. So I think that that's one of the best things that I've seen in terms of supporting craft in British Columbia.
And those kind of predatory practices that you alluded to there from these various consultants that kind of came in, that was an issue across Canada. Like, there were a lot of these consultants that were just swindling people and pretending that they knew what they were talking about, often not, giving small, tiny micros, giant documents and standard operating procedures that are meant for, an Aurora-sized enterprise, and just screwing people over left, right, and center. So I'm happy that the industry has wisened up to that, and it's interesting with an industry like the craft cannabis space. People are very trusting because it's a space that everything has been based on trust historically between different people, and so they weren't used to this more corporate world where there's just a lot of shitty, greed-driven kind of I'll take what I can get and I don't care how I get it attitude that does permeate a lot of more corporate culture. So it's been interesting kind of seeing these two different worlds start to collide, and I'm glad that people are aware that that's happening right now and aren't falling prey to that anymore, and that there are organizations like Community Futures out there who are doing an amazing job. And I believe Paul Kelly is actually on this call. He's probably been smiling as you've been given praise to the business transition initiatives.
Hey, Paul, great to have you here. Amazing work, but. And I think it wasn't just that they were willing to trust people. It's that they felt that these growers just didn't see another pathway forward. That they were gonna, with the requirements that the federal government and the sort of the lack of transparency, and you say this, but what does that mean? What do we actually have to do? And just trying to get guidance, I think, was the objective of a lot of the growers. But making sure you're getting guidance from the right people, and for people that are, they're in it to support you rather than in it for their own personal monetary gain, I think is incredibly important. And while you ask your next question, I'm going to let my dog back in.
Well, the next question is there anything else you would add to what you have seen going well so far since legalization has rolled out?
Well, I think just that we're finally starting to see more of the smaller, the micros, the independent cultivators, that they're starting to get licensed. I think that is a really positive step. I know that there's been, there's complaints across the board with lots of different things, but I do think that it's really important. And I think it's also important for the resiliency of the industry is having, diverse producers. It gives more stability. So that's something that I'm really excited that we're starting to see more of, and that I hope in the future we do see a lot more of moving forward.
Cool. Me too. I think a healthy cannabis industry is one that is full of small scale producers, and all of them are able to thrive and make ends meet and support their families and not have to worry about the financial aspect. And that's a huge challenge right now with the various distribution side of things. So maybe that's a nice segue to shift. You have been an MLA, and I know it's your first time being an MLA. You've only been an MLA for what is it, like half a year ish, something like that?
Yes, just over half a year.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that it's been a whole whirlwind of discovering this whole new job that you have entered into now. Have you engaged at all with the cannabis side of things in your time so far as an MLA?
Yeah, so it's definitely been like a very different time, of course, because we're in COVID. I've asked for briefings. So I just want to also be clear, I'm not in the ministry. I don't represent the ministry, but the ministry has been kind enough to provide me with briefings early on. And then more recently, they're really excited with some of the news that they had coming out. So they wanted to tell me all about the work that they were doing. So I got to chat with them yesterday, which was wonderful. I really think that they're a great group trying to do the right thing. And I think that because there were so many unknowns with the cannabis industry, that at the beginning it was really that safety, that enforcement. And now that we're seeing that, okay, it's been going relatively well. I think that they have a really good relationship with the dispensaries. And I'll just back it up in case people don't know. So the federal government, they oversee cultivation. So the provincial government doesn't touch that. That's all federal. The provincial government oversees distribution and sales. So they are the ones that provide the licenses to any of the retail outlets. And then they also make changes regarding those regulations. And then how local governments are involved is with zoning. And so that's with their land use planning, what they're allowing on their land. And so and of course, different municipalities and regional districts are going to take a very different approach. And so there's sort of a mosaic across British Columbia with how things have rolled out. And so I will just, while we're on the podcast, I'll tell you some of the exciting things that the provincial government has just done. And so one of those is direct delivery. So they're now allowing, and so that will come into effect July 15th. But what they're allowing now is for dispensaries to be able to deliver.
Wait. Sorry. Direct delivery is coming into effect July 15th?
Yeah.
And just to make sure we're talking about the same thing, you're talking about small scale producers being able to deliver their product to retails.
No, that's not. Sorry, that's not. Sorry, that's
okay,
not.
Because that's what it's called when people say direct delivery. That's usually what they're referring to.
Sorry,
you know what?
Different. My bad. No, that and farm gate. Sorry, the consultation piece will happen later. Sorry.
Okay, it's a different thing. You got my hopes up big time there. Oh,
I'm embarrassed. No.
No, that's okay. That's okay. So tell us, when you say direct delivery, what do you mean in that case?
What I meant was retail delivery. So what retail is going to be able to do is, someone's going to be able to go onto the website or call up their local dispensary, and the dispensary now will be able to drive that product or bike that product or walk that product to that person's location. And so they'll have to make sure that the person receiving the product, it doesn't actually have to be the person that ordered it, but it has to be an adult with identification. So that's one big piece that's going to be really, I think that's going to help our dispensaries be a lot, basically be more competitive. We know, from an unregulated market, often people received cannabis deliveries at their home. That's how they, if they weren't meeting at their home, then they were meeting at a third location. Where this provides, people, if they're at home, they might order a pizza and then call their retail outlet to get that product delivered to their home. So,
and then the underground world, like or just in the cannabis market generally in Canada, like the single biggest source of the single biggest market share for distribution is underground unlicensed online stores. Like that is what Canadians are proving that they want with their money. They want to be able to go online, order a thing, and have it sent to their home. So that's great to hear that the government's finally letting independent retailers start to take advantage of that, because that's what people want.
Well, and I think it's an important piece too. I think that there's sometimes, there's stigma around that. If you're, say, a teacher, you might be worried about being seen coming out of a dispensary, where with this, someone's delivering something at your house. It could be an Amazon package, it could be pizza. Hopefully you're not shopping at Amazon, you're shopping local.
Fuck that company and Jeff Bezos and his attitude towards his employees. Oh, that
terrible.
Yeah. And the thing is, they're so rich that they could easily just give everybody a salary where they can live comfortably and still be the richest company in the world. It's like,
Absolutely.
why do you have to like make your employees be on welfare when you're literally one of the richest two people in the world? Anyway, don't want to go down that tangent, but yes, don't shop locally, not on Amazon.
That's right. It's totally, yes. So that's coming. And another thing that is for the consumer is probably going to be less exciting, but what I actually think is really incredibly important for the dispensaries is up to now, the dispensaries have all had to every single one, or sorry, the retailers, every single one of their employees has had to go through security training. And so, it's time, it's money. It means that when if someone gets sick and then you need to fill that spot, you might have to, you're waiting in order to be able to fill that spot because that person has to go through that process. And now they've looked at, I believe it was, they processed 7,000 applications, and not one of them had any ties to organized crime or anything. So they're scrapping that.
Good.
I think it was that, it's at the beginning, you want to make it as, they were concerned. We didn't know what this was going to look like. So let's make sure everyone gets a security clearance. And then they realize like, though this is completely bureaucratic, it doesn't make sense. And so this is where I see that the provincial government is really shifting. They're making sure that we're keeping people safe. But they're realistic and like, what are we able to provide? How can we open this up? Which comes to
direct delivery.
And so they're going to be starting those consultations in July.
Yeah.
And so I think that, and they're, from what I've talked to them, I think that they really want to get this right and get something that makes a lot of sense. And so, I know that they're going to be reaching out. I'm assuming that there's going to be, I think there's a few pieces they're still trying to work out before everything's ready to go public. But once they do, I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunities for people to provide feedback. And I think it's really important that if this is going to be something that's going to impact you or your business, or you think that it might impact you or your business in the future, that you do submit and that you provide that feedback so that they're able to have, as much understanding and diversity of opinion as possible, because we know there's also going to be, some people that don't want to see farm gate, don't want to see direct delivery, that they're scared that the cannabis culture is still scary, where I think that we want to have a lot of voices saying, and I'm just, with anything the government puts out.
Yeah.
Half people hate it, half the people hate it.
I say interesting because I thought you were going a different direction. I thought you were going to say like the big enterprises don't want to see that because it means that the people who grow actual good cannabis in BC would then have a much easier path to market, and they would lose market share because people don't want their crappy cannabis. I thought so. I wasn't expecting it to go to this, which is interesting because I don't really. I'm so in the weeds of the cannabis industry, pun not intended, that that I like forget that there's still a lot of stigma around, and a lot of people who don't understand that it's not just this thing that gets you high and it's like a gateway drug to terrible things and all the various blah 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 that people share about it that's completely unfounded in reality.
Yeah, well, and I think that we have a bit of a different reality in the Kootenays. I mean, there's been a lot of cannabis cultivation going on for a very long time, and so for us, I think that there's been a lot of stigma has sort of been shed over the years. But there's still definitely going to be communities in British Columbia that just haven't had any exposure or experience with cannabis, or they tried it once in university and it was a scary experience or something like that. So there's still going to be fear and stigma around it. I will not try to guess how larger industry players are going to see this move, but I just encourage anyone that is in the industry to provide that feedback, because I think having that diversity, and I personally want to see Farmgate move forward. I think it's going to be really great for things like tourism. You look at the wine industry and how many people go to the Okanagan just to do wine tours, and I could completely see something like that in the future with cannabis. And is it going to happen immediately with Farmgate? I don't know. Probably not. This is something that's going to take a lot of time, but just as I was traveling back from Victoria, because of timing, I wasn't able to make it back to the Kootenays all in one day because I had meetings. So I ended up staying in a little place that was a vineyard, and And I think that moving forward, we might see places where, you're going to your favorite place that cultivates cannabis. You're learning about their product. You're able to buy directly from the farm. And I think that that's going to be a really critical piece of also reducing the stigma moving forward, when people can actually see it on site, talk to the people that work there. You're just that much closer, right? That's why, we love things like, buy local, shop local, go to your farmer's market, get to know your farmer. This is all a part of that relationship. And so I'm very excited to see what this is going to look like moving forward.
So on that note, I have a request for you, if you'd be willing to do us a favor, which is we are trying to get the BCLDB and the LCRB as guests for our episode number 8 on July 23rd, and they're both interested. We've talked to each of them. I had a meeting with them, and they're pretty open to the idea, but they have their own bureaucratic thing that they're going through right now to determine whether or not they are going to be guests, and if so, is it going to go all the way up to the minister of each organization, or is it going to be some a public servant within? My request to you is, can you put in a good word for us and tell them that they should totally be guests here, and that it'll be a great opportunity for them to kind of give us and our audience insight into their perspective? Because I feel like for most of us who are here today, we don't really understand, like, okay, so the Cannabis Secretariat's office determined, hey, farm gate and direct delivery are really important. The BC's premier announced that we're gonna, commit to this by 2022. How does that then happen? How does the BCLDB or the LCRB, who don't really have in-house expertise on cannabis, they're like kind of building that slowly, how do they turn that into an actual implemented program that really makes things better? Because these programs, in my opinion, they have the potential to solve the biggest issues that are going on in BC today, and hopefully then become a model for other provinces. And if they screw it up, then I don't really see this legal craft cannabis industry thriving in the way that it can. I see a lot of people getting hurt, a lot of businesses shutting down, a lot of huge amounts of time and energy and money investments becoming worth nothing because it's not viable. And yeah, so that we're trying to get them as guests so that they can give us insight into that whole process, how they do things. So would you be down to put in a good word for us?
Maybe I already did, Sammy.
Oh yeah. That's what I like to hear, Brittny.
Yeah, cool. No, I do think it would be great. And I think that when you talk about the expertise, I think that that's why they know the public consultation piece is so important, and so they want to hear from the people it's going to impact. They want to hear from you and your listeners and why this is so important for British Columbia. And I think, from an economic perspective, it's going to be critical. And I do also think that if we want to see the craft market thrive, farm gates, direct delivery are going to be huge components of that. So that is something that I am definitely excited about. And so I hope you all, when that, and I'll share it with you, Sammy. I'll be putting it out on my social media whenever that comes out. And then I encourage you, if the government has reached out to you, please provide them with your honest feedback. And I think the more detailed too is better, right? We want them to know exactly what we mean. I think that's important because I think when a lot of us, called for cannabis to be legalized across Canada, our vision of what that was going to look like, and then what we got, didn't really align. And so to be really specific with the things that we want to have, what does this look like? What's that going to look like? How is this going to be allowed? What else is going to be included? Is there anything that should be excluded from the grounds? And I think that it's going to be, so I also think that we're going to go from a starting point of this is what farm gate looks like. And then, as things progress and it's going well, we also will probably likely see more opening. But I think that from the beginning, to have as much feedback from the craft community as possible is going to be really important, for our small businesses, for our rural areas, to be able to make this a viable market for them to be in.
So in your conversations so far, it sounds like you've been having conversations with both the LCRB and the BCLDB. Is that correct? Okay, you're nodding there, so I'll take that to mean yes. What's your sense on how they are approaching these programs? Like, what would you say is their North Star, if there was a North Star? Like, is there, and to just give you some examples of what I mean by that, like, is their goal to help small scale producers thrive? Is that like what they're working towards? Or is there a different thing that they're like really using as their definition for what success looks like with these programs? Can you speak to that at all?
You know what, Sami? That is a question that I wish I would have asked them yesterday, because I don't want to speak on their behalf, and I don't want to, provide any sort of misinformation. I don't know how they would answer that question, and so I would just say you should probably get them on your program and ask them yourself.
So let me ask you a different question. Would you be willing to share your perspectives on what you think, with the caveat of this is not any kind of official information, this is just your opinion? Is that something you're open to, or no?
Yeah, so I mean, I would just say, I think that so first of all, government has to, make sure that there's public safety. So that's always going to be, a huge part of what we do, and that's in the case of cannabis and liquor. Then they're only dealing with distribution. And so I think that what I'm seeing is that they are really working hard on the reconciliation piece. So we know they're working directly with First Nations, which I think is incredibly important. And I do think that they, by them showing that farm gate's going to be important, direct delivery, I think that we're seeing more support for the smaller growers, knowing that really from a federal perspective, I feel like the regulations have been very much in favor in terms of, corporations entering the cannabis market, and not very favorable for small scale growers. And I do believe that the government, that they see that that we want to make sure that the craft growers that are here, the small growers that are here, that they're, able to do well and to keep the community safe while doing that. And I also think that as we see, more cultivators being like really good neighbors, that stigma is going to be addressed as well. Like all of a sudden, maybe, and this is not this I'm putting my Brittny hat on, like, maybe in 10 years people are like, oh yeah, I want to buy the property beside the cannabis farm because my property value is going to be so much higher, right? Now I think that there's a lot of fear around, what it will do to adjacent, people's property, and and I don't think that that's, based on fact. I think, again, that's sort of that fear-based thinking. And so I do think that the government is really just trying to take like I think they're listening, and then they're trying to take a realistic approach. And I think the reconciliation piece is going to be huge moving forward, but then also the consultation piece and really listening to people and seeing, how this will all work out.
Cool. Thanks for that thoughtful answer. I appreciate that. To our audience, we're gonna wrap up the main discussion in about 10 minutes or so. So if you have any questions that you want to get in for the Q&A part, please do ask them. Right now we just have one question from Nick, and if it stays that way, then we'll let the discussion go even longer. I'll kind of like time the start of the Q&A so it matches what my expectations and assumptions are around how long the questions are going to take. So just keep in mind there is a question tab there. Other comments I want to make, Paul, I have seen Paul Kelly is writing a comment like come up and go away like a whole bunch of times. So I'm curious if you like wrote a long thing and like didn't hit enter or something. So just gonna put it out there that I'm really curious what you've been writing for the past half hour that hasn't shown up yet. So back to this discussion with you here, Brittny. In the last episode that we had David Herford and Sophie Mass from the BC Craft Farmers Co-op as guests, and both of those individuals have had a very rich history working in public policy. David on the federal level and Sophie on the BC level, and both have touched cannabis in their careers. And they brought up a thing that I hadn't come across before of what they think needs to happen in order to address the issues you alluded to on the federal level, where it really is skewed towards corporations and it's really challenging for small scale producers. They were saying that for BC, what they think needs to happen, is that the BC Premier goes out and publicly says, hey, federal government, Health Canada, you guys have really screwed things up. You have hurt our province's ability to actually transition. Our economy has been really hurt by the fact that we only have 49 licenses, 3 years into 49 small scale licenses, 3 years into legalization, despite having thousands and thousands and thousands of farmers here who want to transition. Okay, glad to hear that, Paul. He says that we keep answering before he hits send, so that's a good job. We're psychic, Paul. We know what you want to know. And that essentially the BC needs to just take cultivation from the government and from the federal government and say, like, give the file to like the BC Ministry of Agriculture, for example, and that there is appetite for that at the BC Ministry of Agriculture, and that there is precedent for things like this to happen, like with fisheries, for example, or with healthcare. These are all federally regulated things initially, then the provinces took over. They're like, you're doing a bad job, we're going to do it ourselves. So I'm curious, in your experience, albeit relatively short, it's only been 7-8 months now, as an MLA, like, can you speak to that at all? Is that something that you see as being realistic, as being, any and all initial thoughts that you have when you hear me share that? Like, what comes to mind for you? I'm curious.
Yeah, so my understanding is that currently that's not a government priority. And I think that there's a few things with it. I think it's something that's extremely complicated and complex, and it's a capacity issue. And I also think that, we know that on the federal level, they're going to be, they're doing a review, right? This is the review that they promised. And so I think to preemptively do something before the review is complete doesn't make any sense, right? We should see what comes out of this review, what direction the federal government takes. And I do think right now what the province has determined is things like retail delivery, things like farm gate, things like security screenings. So for them to really work within their wheelhouse with, what is within their jurisdiction, and to focus on making that really strong and make those policies strong, that's where they want to focus now. In the future,
and that makes a lot of sense, that you'd want to fix the problems that are happening locally first before you try to fix things that are outside of your jurisdiction. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so I think it's like fixing what's within the jurisdiction, but is it something that's going to be pursued 5 years down the line? I don't know, but I think that that's going to be really heavily dependent on the direction that the federal government goes. Again, that will be dependent on who gets elected. We're hearing, I don't even know if we call it whispers anymore. A bunch of MPs just did their sort of departing statements, MPs that don't expect that, or have decided or don't expect to be running again. So we know that there is a federal election coming up here, in the fall, next spring, I don't know, but it will be the federal government, depending on who gets into power and what they decide and what the direction that they want to take all of these things. There's a bunch of unknowns for that as well.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I get Nick, maybe you could add a comment here. Nick attended, there was a live discussion earlier this week with the MPs that are in charge of that review for the 3-year review with Health Canada. And Nick kind of reached out to me, like, because after he attended that, being like, oh my God, I'm so worried about this, because they're essentially patting themselves on the back on a job well done, and that like nothing needs to change, and that it's going great. And that's incredibly worrisome if that's going to be the official outcome of the review, that things are going great. So Nick, I don't know, maybe do you want to like maybe even do you want to jump on the call, Nick, and just share with video? It was the AMA. I didn't realize it was the AMA that was that you were talking about. Okay. Anyway, I'll just leave that out there. Nick and Paul, if either of you guys want to share your thoughts in the chat around what that was, because this is secondhand information. I'm just sharing what Nick told me, and we know how information, as it gets passed by more and more people, gets skewed a bit more. So I would rather one of you guys share your thoughts on that. But that's like, I'm worried about that, if that's like what they are thinking about how the regulations have been going so far, because very much not the case.
Well, and then hopefully there is that public consultation piece, on the federal level, and that, that people that are in the industry and impacted by the industry, that they provide submissions. And I know the provincial government's going to be providing a submission. I have no idea what that's going to look like, but I think it's going to be really important that, if they think they've done a good job, that we tell them, where we see room for improvement. Again, this was the first iteration where I'm glad that Canada has legalized cannabis. Do I see that there's tremendous room for improvement? Absolutely. And now is the opportunity to be vocal about what changes need to be made. We know in many cases, cannabis legalization, all of the fear mongering around it, none of it's, been realized. And so now I think is the time that we're able to make, policies and regulations and the laws to be, more flexible, or, in a way that enables our small scale cultivators to transition and to thrive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, here's to hoping that takes place. I mean, I would
call to action.
Yeah. It'd be really, really, really sad if, as a result of legalization, the craft cannabis industry kind of just slowly like fizzles out and dissipates. And, I know things have gotten a lot more stressful. Like anybody who stayed underground, like the RCMP is cracking down way harder now. So like that's just hugely stressful for people. And a lot of these people want to transition. It's not like they don't want to transition. It's just the regulations are crazy. What Health Canada is requiring is crazy. Needing to spend, if somebody wants to have an in-drawer facility and that's just what excites them, needing to spend like upwards of $500,000, $1 million just to apply for a license is pretty ludicrous. and then all the hoops they make people jump through is just crazy. I mean, the only reason we exist as a company, CertiCraft, is because so many people were ready to give up, because just once you're licensed, staying on top of all that is not something that comes easy to a lot of growers. It's a very different bureaucratic and technical way of thinking about things. It's very computer oriented or data oriented. And, a lot of the growers that I know, they're super nerdy and technical when it comes to like plant biology, when it comes to agriculture and all the things that they love. But once it shifts into now you're tracking data for bureaucratic purposes, it just doesn't make sense for people. So we if the regulations were good, we probably wouldn't need to exist as a business. So in some ways, I guess I'm thankful that Health Canada's overregulated this industry. But at the end of the day, we would rather like not have our business and have a thriving craft cannabis industry than to have to exist because things suck so much. All right, I'm going to shift to the questions here. We have a few questions that have come up for you. The first one is not a question. It's Dave Christie saying that he had the same question that I asked you that you answered. So I'll just say we're done answering this. Paul's question has one upvote, so we'll start there. If we copy Saskatchewan's distribution, craft will succeed. It needs to happen pretty darn fast. The risks are few. Benefits to economy recovery is massive. And we'll see more grower transition if we then have a good distribution model that actually makes sense. Do you think this is likely, Brittny?
I you know what? I'll be honest with you. I don't know very much about the Saskatchewan distribution model. So if you could provide me with more information.
I'll tell you more information. It's basically pretty similar to how I hope direct delivery emerges. Essentially, it's just a producer can sell directly to a retailer. The government does not involve themselves with that in any kind of way outside of just taking taxes. That's it. Pretty simple.
Well, I think that's something that we should to be advocating for. And I think and I've heard that from dispensaries, and I've heard that from cultivators, that they want to see that direct delivery, which yes, of course. And so I think that, I don't see why that couldn't be implemented here. But, I think it will also be really important to provide that feedback of, why this is going to work. What are the challenges that people are facing right now, and why the model that works in Saskatchewan is a model that we should be using in British Columbia.
Yeah, my fingers are crossed that the BCLDB, for those of you in the audience, BCLDB is in charge of implementing the direct delivery program. The LCRB is in charge of implementing the farm gate. And just to make sure that we're on the same page, I know we've used these acronyms all throughout, but just in case, because I know a few of the attendees here are from other provinces, the BCLDB is the Liquor Distribution Board, which is the provincial distribution board that's also in charge of cannabis now. And the LCRB is the Liquor and Cannabis, is it regulatory? What does the RB stand for? Regulatory body?
Regulatory, no, board. Oh gosh, now you've got me all. Yeah.
Anyway, they're in charge of licensing retailers and things like that. Is their whole thing. I really sincerely hope that the BCLDB doesn't have any ego around this, and they're okay with just letting go of having their hands in the actual supply chain and just letting small scale producers sell directly to retailers and just take that taxes. It simplifies everything for them. Like, they are a huge bottleneck today on what's going on, and they're also just, they don't understand cannabis. It's THC is not the only thing that makes cannabis good. I'd much rather have something with like 4% THC, 5% terps, a whole bunch of CBD and CBG and other cannabinoids, and have it be like grown by an outdoor grower that absolutely loves what they're doing, than to buy something that's got 30% THC that was grown by like a Tilray. Like, that's just, I would never want that. And they don't understand that. And so they shouldn't be making the decision on what gets to go to market. Like, it makes no sense.
Yeah, no, and I think that that's an important piece, right? Is to be vocal about, what we think, what people think is important, and why that makes sense for them. I think that's incredibly important, right? And that's why it's also important to use this opportunity to have your voice heard. When they start going out and asking about these things, this is your chance. And to be vocal and to be specific. Please be specific with what you want. It's not just like, that sounds great, but like, what about it do you want? What about it? What do you want to see? Because, in order to, what I want to see is that communication piece is really there, where they see what people are writing and then understand it in the same way that the people were writing meant it, so that we can get to sort of a common understanding of what will be beneficial, and and just seeing what that looks like, and maybe we'll I don't know, and I'm excited to see where the feedback sort of lands us. And I do think from everyone that I've talked to in the province, that they have good intentions and want to be supportive of the industry, and do want to get this piece right. And so I do encourage people to provide that feedback.
Awesome. Yeah, I think everybody needs it to be gotten right, because if they don't get it right, there's people aren't going to transition, and it's just going to get more and more stressful, especially people with families with kids. Like, I can't imagine being a parent that's just loves cannabis. That's my passion. And I've been growing for 30 years, and now I have like an 8-year-old. Like, I can't imagine the stress that like that person is dealing with on a daily basis right now. And they want to transition. They fought for legalization to happen. They were excited that it finally happened. And then it turned out it was just made with corporate lobbyists and enterprise lobbyists informing Health Canada and determining how all that came to be without consultation for small scale producers. And it's a tough spot, and I sincerely hope that this time next year we can all be like, yeah, it's possible. People are starting to transition now, because there is an actual viable path to market that makes sense, and it's not going to involve in people pulling their hair out and just be what it is right now. I know we have a few people on this call who are small scale producers around Canada, and I am certain that you guys who are here can attest to how terrible it is right now. If either of you guys want to share any horror stories in the chat, feel free to go ahead and do so. I'm gonna
have to put pause for a second. The train's gonna pass my house in like 2 minutes. I can hear it way down a few kilometers away, so I'll have to mute. And then, And
then a minute or two later, I'll have to mute as the train goes by my window here. You got the train tracks right. Whoop. Let's see, does that even show? Yeah, you can see the train tracks right there. Well, we have one last question from Nick, which I guess is kind of related to what we've been talking about. Is there any possibility of cannabis being moved out of the LDB?
I don't think in the short term, but I think that, I'm hopeful that we'll see, maybe more involvement with other ministries. But, I don't know. This is sort of my hope and not what I've heard, from the government. But, I think that there's, obviously cannabis touches other ministries. And so it would be good to have, I think, more of a direct relationship with those ministries as well.
Cool. Well, we have 5 minutes left here in our allotted time. Brittny, is there anything that you think is important to bring up that you want to talk about related to the craft cannabis industry that we haven't touched on yet?
I'm not sure. I mean, I'll just, one of the things that I did, that I thought was interesting was we had at the Regional District of Central Kootenay, some of the planners, they hadn't really, they hadn't didn't have a lot of experience with cannabis. We had one planner, and I think that oh, here we go.
Train. All right. Well, while she is waiting for the train to pass, I'll sing everybody a song. Thank you, Brittny. You're an awesome MLA. Thank you for joining us here today. I guess the train is gone, so I will stop. And I'm really curious to hear more of your thoughts.
Sami. Well, thank you so much. How very. Now I forgot where I was going. I apologize.
RDCK. You're talking about the regional district.
Okay. And so, I think Miri did a great job when she was working on, trying to have a really good approach of where they were going to let cannabis businesses. But then she left, and some of the newer people didn't have a lot of experience with cannabis businesses. And so I called up Che, who I'm sure you know, and he was
one of our customers.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, Che's amazing, and so
amazing human being. I 100% concur.
Yes, and so Che LeBlanc, I was like, can I bring, some people from the regional district, just to see what, outdoor cannabis cultivation looks like just before harvest. And he was really kind and let us come to his property. And I think they had already been up all night because they were about to do harvest. And he spent about an hour with us and just, answering questions of, what it looks like. And I think the first thing was, getting out of the vehicle, it's like, people are always worried, with outdoor, like, oh, it's going to be so stinky. And it's like, it wasn't like that at all. Like, it smelled beautifully fragrant. At least I thought it smelled, quite lovely. Yeah. Just trying to, break down the stigma, understanding what it actually looks like, and so for anyone that is in the process of, trying to get licensed or working with government, like I highly recommend that you start trying to develop those relationships, particularly with your local government early. I know that it has been challenging for some people with their local governments, with different zoning. Some places just don't seem to want to allow, cannabis at all. But I think, trying to break down the stigma, if there is a place, are you able to bring people to there, show them what it looks like? I think breaking down those barriers and having those conversations is a really tremendous opportunity. And it's going to mean that moving forward, there's going to be more support for things like farm gate, because, people aren't going to be so worried with what that might look like in their community, or what might that look like, if your neighbor wants to apply for something like this. But, when you're able to break down some of that stigma and ground truth it and have those open conversations and dialogues, I think it goes a really long way. And also, just one of the things I've noticed too, being in government, sometimes people come at, I've seen them go at other people, or they come at me and they're really like angry and disrespectful and want to yell. But the people that come with like information and this is what they want to, this is what they're trying to accomplish, they get a lot further, because when you can have this great reciprocal discussion, respectful, people are listening, it goes a lot further in changing people's minds than the sort of, I'm frustrated, I'm going to let it all out on you. But you can't work in the same way and develop those long-lasting relationships really moving forward that I think benefit both government and industry and neighbors. So I would just encourage people to just go in there with good intentions, and I think people will listen to you.
Yeah, and I think in addition to, you brought up the example with taking people to Rosebud Cannabis Farms and, just understanding what a farm is like. And I think that's a huge part of it. And another part of it is that a lot of people who have more of like the stigma kind of attitudes, they don't realize that growers are just people who are just nerdy about plants. That's all it is. It's just, they just love plants, and they love this, the cannabis plant specifically. And very often they have loved ones in their family who are suffering from major medical issues. And that's often why people get into it in the first place. Like, my dad has cancer, I want to help him not suffer. Or my mom has MLS, and this is the thing that really helps her. And just getting to really meet the person and recognize, oh, you're just another person. you're not this like crazy criminal like I had in my mind that like is all sketched out and weird and whatever it might be that's in people's mind. And I've heard from multiple different people from experiences they've had going to their city council, to their equivalent to the RDCK, and just giving people an opportunity to meet them. And people who came to, like I've heard about a particular city council meeting in somewhere in Vancouver Island where a grower went to make the case for their property, and there were people who came to that meeting because they were trying to decide whether or not to allow cannabis, period. And there were a whole bunch of people who came who were there to say like, no cannabis whatsoever, we're not down with it. And they just talked to this grower, and over the course of half an hour, we're kind of like, okay, never mind, we're not gonna have this approach. We realize now that we were wrong. This is just another human being, and they're really respectful and kind and have been doing what they're doing for like a decade now, and we've had no idea, and it's caused no issue. And I think that's a big part of it too, just the human element.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you are welcome. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for joining us here. I'm glad, I'm honored that we get to be your very first podcast since you have become an MLA. I hope that your journey as a MLA here in BC continues to be fruitful, and that you get to see the change that you want to realize in our lovely province and in our local region here in the Kootenays. It's clear you got a wonderful heart, and that you're doing this for the right reason. And I really hope that you can make our little local area a better place.
Thank you. I hope so too. And I'm going to work really hard on doing that. So thank you so much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed it. This was really fun. And have a wonderful weekend, everybody.
Thanks, Brittny, if any of you guys have any ideas on guests that you think we should have in the future, please hit us up. You can touch base with Nick or myself, or just say something in the chat. I'm going to stop the event now. It's going to automatically restart from the beginning in about 2 minutes. And thank you, everybody, for being here. And the chat will stay open once the event ends.
And thanks to all the listeners.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, Brittny. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.